Story number 1.
I had never been so eager to leave the dorms. The constant noise, the communal bathrooms, and the lack of privacy, it had all started to take its toll. So when I found a reasonably priced apartment just off campus, I jumped at the chance. It was a two-bedroom place, and the landlord was offering it at a great rate. My new roommate, Emily, seemed nice enough when we met. She was a senior, quiet, and not much of a social butterfly. She told me she liked the peace and solitude that came with living in the apartment and didn't mind that we'd only really see each other in passing. The apartment itself was a little older. It had that distinct smell of aging wood and old carpet, but it wasn't anything unbearable. The walls were thin, but at least the place was spacious enough for both of us. Emily had already moved in a week before me and had settled into the second bedroom. When I arrived, I unpacked my things and tried to make the place feel like home. The apartment had a cozy charm to it, even if it did feel a bit too quiet at times. For the first few days, things were completely normal. Emily was quiet, often buried in her textbooks, and I respected her space. We exchanged pleasantries when our paths crossed, but we mostly kept to ourselves. I was okay with that. After all, I wasn't looking for a new best friend. I just wanted a place to sleep and study. But then, after about a week, I started to notice strange things. It started with the noises at night. At first, it was nothing too alarming, just faint sounds of footsteps. I assumed Emily was just up late studying or pacing around the apartment. But as the days went by, the sounds got louder. They weren't the kind of sounds that came from someone walking normally. It was more like someone was dragging their feet, slowly and deliberately. The odd thing was, the sounds didn't stop. They would continue for hours, long after I had gone to bed. I asked Emily about it one morning, casually, while we were both in the kitchen. "Hey, I've been hearing weird noises at night, like footsteps or something. Is everything okay?" I tried to sound nonchalant. Emily didn't look up from her coffee. "Oh yeah, I get up late sometimes. Just have a lot on my mind. Sorry if it's keeping you up." I didn't press her on it. She seemed tired, maybe just stressed from school. I had my own work to do, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But the noises didn't stop. They continued for several nights, growing louder, more insistent, until it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the sound of footsteps anymore. It started to sound like something heavier, something scraping against the floor, like furniture being moved around. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I knocked on Emily's door. She opened it with a blank expression, wearing headphones, her eyes a little glassy, like she hadn't slept in days. "Is everything okay?" I asked. I I keep hearing these strange noises in the middle of the night." She nodded slowly. "It's nothing. I'll try to be quieter." I didn't press her for details, but something about the way she said it felt off. There was something almost detached in her tone, like she wasn't fully there. Over the next few days, I began to notice other things. Small things at first, but unsettling nonetheless. I'd leave the apartment for class in the morning and come back to find things slightly out of place. Items moved just a few inches to the left or right, or a drawer slightly ajar. It wasn't enough to make me suspect someone else was coming into the apartment, but it was strange. Emily had always been very tidy, and she didn't seem like the type to leave things out of order. One evening, I came home to find the kitchen light on, but no one was in the kitchen. The fridge was wide open, and there were dishes in the sink that hadn't been there before. Emily's door was closed, but I didn't hear any sound coming from inside her room. I hesitated for a moment, but I decided to just let it go. She was probably studying late again, and I didn't want to invade her privacy. But it didn't stop there. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, a soft, barely audible murmur coming from the hallway. I sat up in bed, straining my ears to listen. The whispering continued for several minutes before it stopped abruptly. My heart was pounding in my chest. I tried to brush it off, but the feeling of unease lingered. The next morning, I confronted Emily again. This time, I was more direct. "Emily, I've been hearing things at night. Whispering. Like conversations, but I can't make out the words. Are you okay?" Emily didn't react immediately. She just stared at me for a long moment, her eyes dark and tired. Finally, she shrugged. "It's nothing. Just stress. I'll try to keep it down." But this time I didn't believe her. I knew something was wrong. That night, I decided to stay awake. I had to know what was going on. It was around 2 a.m. when I finally heard it again, the soft whispering like a low conversation happening just outside my door. I lay perfectly still, listening. The sound was coming from the living room just beyond the hallway. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and more distinct. There were two voices, one higher pitched and the other lower, but neither voice was clearly recognizable. I got out of bed and crept toward the living room. I had to know who or what was in the apartment. When I reached the doorway, I froze. Emily was sitting on the couch, her back to me, staring straight ahead. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and she was whispering to herself. But it wasn't just random words. It was like she was having a conversation with someone. The words weren't clear, but it was definitely a dialogue, a back-and-forth exchange that made my skin crawl. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to call out, to ask her what was going on, but another part of me was paralyzed with fear. I didn't know who she was talking to, and I didn't know if I wanted to find out. Finally, I took a deep breath and quietly backed away from the doorway. I didn't want to confront her, not like this. I returned to my room, locked the door, and lay in bed, wide awake, my heart racing. The next morning, I woke up to find the apartment eerily silent. Emily's door was closed, but the usual hum of her studying or moving around was absent. I hesitated before knocking, but when I did, there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time, but still no response. I tried the door handle. It was locked. My heart began to race as I realized something was wrong. I couldn't wait any longer. I grabbed my phone and called the landlord, asking if he had any contact information for Emily. He said he hadn't heard from her in days. That was when I started to panic. I called the police. When they arrived, they found the apartment locked up tight, just as I had left it. Emily's belongings were still in her room, but she was nowhere to be found. The most unsettling part? Her phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, still plugged into the charger, as if she had just left. They scoured the building and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of her. The investigation was inconclusive, and eventually they stopped searching. I couldn't live there anymore. I packed my things and moved out a week later. To this day, I still don't know what happened to Emily. The apartment stayed vacant for months after that, and I never heard anything about her again. Every now and then I wonder if it was all just a product of stress or if I was imagining things. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I can still hear the whispering, and I can't help but wonder if Emily is still there, waiting. Story the end.
Story number 2.
I was 22 when I moved to Seattle for grad school. I had just gotten accepted into the University of Washington's master's program in library and information science. Not exactly glamorous, but it was what I wanted to do with my life. The only problem was money. Between tuition, books, and just living in a new city, I needed to save where I could. That's how I met Kristen. I found her through a roommate matching board at the university. She was also a grad student studying psychology, a year ahead of me. She had a 2-bedroom apartment just north of the campus and needed someone to move in quickly to help split the rent. The price was shockingly reasonable. Her message said she was clean, quiet, and preferred someone who wasn't into partying or loud guests. That suited me perfectly. When we met in person, I immediately felt at ease. She was tall, a little reserved, but friendly enough. She showed me around the apartment. It was on the second floor of a small brick building from the 60s. The place had character, wood paneling, creaky floors, and a smell that I couldn't quite place but didn't find offensive. Lived in. She had minimal furniture, just the essentials. I liked that. Kristen's room was in the back, next to the bathroom. Mine was toward the front, next to the kitchen. There was a small living room in between. We didn't share closets or food. She had rules about noise after 10 p.m., no overnight guests unless it was prearranged, and we alternated bathroom cleaning. Honestly, I appreciated the structure. The first month was uneventful. She wasn't very social, but I didn't take it personally. I figured she was just busy with school and work, and I had a full schedule too. We were polite to each other, said good morning, good night, and made small talk maybe once or twice a week. I rarely saw her leave, though. Her classes were mostly in the afternoon, and she said she worked a few evenings at the university's counseling center. That made sense, given her program. It wasn't until the second month that things started to feel off. One night, around 1 a.m., I woke up to what I thought was whispering. I assumed it was coming from outside at first. The window was cracked. But as I lay there, I realized it was inside the apartment. I got up thinking Kristen might be on the phone, maybe having a late night conversation in the living room. But when I peeked out of my door, the lights were all off. Still, the whispering continued, very low, inconsistent. I couldn't make out words. I walked a little further and saw a thin strip of light under her bedroom door. The whispers were definitely coming from there. I stood there, confused for a minute, and then went back to bed. The next morning, Kristen acted completely normal. She made tea in the kitchen, asked me about my classes. I didn't bring it up. I figured maybe she'd been listening to a podcast or on a call with someone. It felt too weird to ask about. But it happened again and again. Every few nights I'd hear the same whispering, always late, always from her room. Sometimes I'd see the light, sometimes not. Once, I got brave and pressed my ear to the door. I couldn't understand what was being said, but it was more than one voice. There was Kristen's voice, I was almost sure of that. But there were other murmurs, almost like echoes, or responses. Not loud, but present. Then, one night, something changed. I woke up to the whispering again, but this time it was closer, louder. I turned on my lamp and sat up. My heart was pounding. I thought maybe she had company over, but when I opened my bedroom door, I realized the voices were coming from the bathroom. The light was off. I walked quietly down the hallway, each step colder than the last. The whispering continued, soft and frantic, like someone praying or arguing. I reached the bathroom door. It was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open. No one was inside. I flipped on the light. The room was empty, just the faint sound of dripping from the sink. I stood there for a while, trying to calm myself. Then I noticed something in the mirror. Not a reflection, just a smudge, like a handprint. Not on the glass, but behind it, inside. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds before backing out and returning to my room. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I asked Kristen if she had friends over. She said no. I mentioned the voices cautiously. She just blinked and said, "I talk in my sleep sometimes." Her tone was flat. Then she walked away. Another time, I came home earlier than usual. It was around 4 p.m., and I had just finished a seminar. Kristen wasn't expecting me. I unlocked the front door and stepped in quietly. I heard her voice again from her bedroom. I almost called out to say I was home, but stopped myself. Something about the tone wasn't right. She wasn't talking normally. She was chanting, slow, measured, repeating something I couldn't understand. It sounded like another language. I tiptoed back out and pretended I'd just gotten home when I came in again an hour later. She greeted me like nothing had happened. Things escalated from there. One night, I woke to find my bedroom door wide open. I always closed it. I always locked it, but it was open. I turned on the light and checked the hallway. Kristen's door was open too. I stepped toward it, hesitant, and peeked in. She was standing in the middle of the room, facing the wall, arms at her sides, completely still. I froze. She didn't move, didn't speak. I backed away, returned to my room, and locked the door again. I pushed a chair against the knob and sat awake until sunrise. In the morning, she was in the kitchen making toast. "I think you were sleepwalking last night," I said casually, watching her. She didn't look up. "Was I?" "Yes," I said. You were just standing there in your room." She nodded slowly, buttering her toast. "I don't remember." I couldn't take it anymore. I started looking for a way out. My lease was semester-based, and I still had 3 months left. I asked the property manager if there was a way to terminate early. He said no, not without losing the deposit and paying a penalty. I considered it. Seriously. That week, Kristen's behavior got stranger. I found pieces of string tied in knots in random places around the apartment, under the couch cushion, inside a kitchen drawer, taped behind a cabinet door. One morning, I opened the fridge and found a jar of what looked like dead moths in cloudy water. I threw it out. That night, it was back. I confronted her. She didn't deny anything, just said, "Some things need to be left alone." I demanded an explanation. She stared at me for a long time, then finally said, "You hear them too, don't you?" I didn't respond. Kristen walked back to her room without another word. That night, the whispering was worse, louder, closer. I woke up and realized it was coming from inside my room. I turned on the lamp and saw, just for a split second, the silhouette of someone crouched in the corner. I screamed. The figure vanished as the light came on. I ran to Kristen's room. It was empty. No bed, no furniture, just like she'd never lived there. The walls were covered in chalk drawings, symbols, circles, patterns I couldn't recognize. I called the police. They came, searched the place, found nothing. Kristen was gone. There was no record of her at the counseling center. No enrollment under her name in the psychology program. Even the apartment's rental agreement was in a different name. Some guy who died 5 years earlier. The property manager said Kristen had been living there for a while, but he didn't have her paperwork on file. Said she paid in cash. I moved out that same week. They never found her. I tried to follow up with the university, the police, even hiring a private investigator. Nothing. It was like she never existed. I've lived in 4 apartments since then, different cities, different roommates, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I swear I hear whispering. Soft, familiar, coming from the corner of the room. Story the end.
Story number 3.
I thought I knew what I was getting into when I decided to share an apartment with a roommate. Fresh out of college, I was ready for the next chapter of my life. Graduate school, a new city, new people. The idea of living alone was appealing, but the reality of paying rent on my own was not. So when I saw the ad for a 2-bedroom apartment just a couple of blocks from campus, I figured a roommate would be the perfect solution. The place was small, but it had potential. The living room was cozy with a big window that let in plenty of light, and the kitchen had just enough space for us both to cook, though it looked like it hadn't been updated in years. The only thing that struck me as odd was the roommate situation. Her name was Sarah, and the listing said she was a student at the same university. When we met, she seemed nice enough, though a little quiet. She told me she preferred a calm, peaceful living environment and didn't mind keeping to herself. That was fine with me. I wasn't looking for someone to hang out with every day. The first few weeks were uneventful. Sarah stayed mostly in her room, and I did the same. We'd occasionally run into each other in the kitchen or hallway, but those moments were brief. I respected her space, and she did the same for me. The apartment had a strange kind of stillness to it, but I figured it was just the nature of shared living, everyone doing their own thing in separate corners of the world. But things started to feel off after about a month. It wasn't anything major at first, just small, subtle things that made me feel uneasy. I'd come home to find the front door slightly ajar, even though I was sure I had locked it. Or I'd hear strange noises at night, scraping sounds like furniture being moved, or the faint sound of footsteps when I was supposed to be the only one home. I tried to brush it off, but after a few more incidents, I couldn't ignore the creeping sense of dread. One night, I came home late from a study session and walked into the living room to find Sarah sitting on the couch, staring at the wall. She wasn't watching TV or doing anything productive, just sitting there in complete silence. The lamp next to her was on, casting an eerie glow on the room. When I said her name, she didn't respond immediately. Her head slowly turned to look at me, and she smiled in a way that felt almost too wide, too forced. "Oh, hey," she said, her voice flat. "Just thinking." I nodded awkwardly and walked to my room, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I could hear whispers, faint murmurs that seemed to be coming from somewhere in the apartment. I got up several times to check, but each time I found nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the sense of unease persisted, gnawing at me as the days went by. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of movement in the hallway. It was late, almost 2 a.m., and I had been sound asleep. I heard the soft padding of footsteps, and then the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Sarah's door. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I listened for a moment, straining to hear what was going on, but the footsteps didn't continue. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but there was no more sound. After a few minutes, I got up cautiously and stepped into the hallway. I looked toward Sarah's room, where the door was slightly ajar. I couldn't hear anything now, but I felt a gnawing curiosity. I knocked lightly on her door. but there was no answer. The door was cracked enough that I could just see into the room, and that's when I noticed something strange. Sarah was sitting at her desk, facing the wall, her back to me. It looked like she was writing something in a notebook, but there was no light on in her room, just the faint glow of the moon coming through the window. I called her name again, this time louder, and she jumped as though startled before quickly turning around. "Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to wake you," she said quickly, her voice sounding off, too quiet and almost as if she was trying to suppress it. "Just had something on my mind." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's late. Everything okay?" Yeah, she replied, smiling again, but this time the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine. Go ahead and get some sleep." I didn't say anything else. Something about her demeanor, her stiff posture, the way she'd been sitting in the dark, sent a chill down my spine. But I didn't want to overreact. Maybe she was just stressed out. Maybe she was dealing with her own things. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that nothing was wrong. But the feeling didn't go away. Over the next few days, Sarah's behavior started to get stranger. She would often stay in her room for hours, not responding when I knocked or called her name. When I did see her, she seemed distant, detached, like she wasn't really present, almost like she was lost in her own world. Her eyes were always wide and unblinking, and sometimes she would just sit there, staring at the walls. One evening, I returned home from class to find Sarah sitting in the living room again. But this time, she wasn't just staring at the wall. She was staring at the front door, as though waiting for someone. The air in the room felt thick, almost suffocating. She didn't react when I walked in, and I had to clear my throat to get her attention. "Hey, everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't answer at first. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door, and I felt an uncomfortable tension building between us. Finally, she spoke. "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you?" Her voice was barely a whisper, and she didn't even look at me as she said it. I froze, unsure how to respond. The way she asked the question, the way her words hung in the air, there was something unsettling about it. I glanced at the door, half expecting someone to be standing there, but of course there was no one. "No," I said, trying to sound confident. "I don't think so." She nodded slowly, as though processing my answer. "I do. I think they're watching me." Then she added almost to herself, "They've been here for a long time." I didn't know what to say to that. The conversation was starting to take a turn I wasn't prepared for. "Who? What are you talking about?" But she just shook her head and muttered, "Never mind, Jasen, it's nothing." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her words, about the way she had looked at the door, as though something or someone was waiting for her. It was as if she knew something I didn't, something dark and terrifying that I couldn't quite grasp. The next day, I woke up to find that Sarah had left. Her room was empty, all her belongings gone. At first, I thought she had just gone home for the weekend or decided to visit family, but something didn't feel right. I tried texting her, but she didn't respond. I left a few voicemails, but still no answer. I asked the landlord, but he said he hadn't heard from her either. A few days passed, and I grew more and more worried. I searched online for any sign of her, but found nothing. It was like she had vanished completely. The apartment felt empty without her, but it also felt different, like something had changed, something was missing. Then, a week later, I found something in her room. It was hidden in the corner, buried under the bed, a notebook. I didn't know why I picked it up, but I did. Flipping through the pages, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were sketches, detailed, disturbing drawings of the apartment, but not just the apartment. There were figures, shadowy shapes, drawn in the corners of every page. And in the last drawing, there was one of me, sitting in my room, with dark eyes watching me from behind the door. I never saw Sarah again. I moved out of the apartment shortly after that. I couldn't stay there, not after everything that happened. I still don't know what happened to her or if she was ever really there at all. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that notebook and wonder if the shadows she drew were real or if they were just a warning.
Story number 4.
I moved to Chicago in the fall of 2019 for a job I had been chasing for 2 years. It was at a mid-sized marketing firm that had finally taken notice of my freelance work and offered me a full-time position. The pay wasn't incredible, but it was enough to live on my own. At least that's what I thought. Reality hit pretty quickly. Between rent, transportation, and student loans, living alone just wasn't an option. So I did what most young professionals do when they're starting out in a big city. I looked for a roommate on Craigslist. I browsed through hundreds of ads looking for something cheap but not sketchy. That balance is harder to find than you'd think. Most of the listings were either way out of my price range or full of red flags. People with 5 cats in a studio, couples renting out a closet, or folks looking for female-only tenants but were very vague about everything else. Then I found an ad that seemed oddly normal. It was for a 2-bedroom apartment in Uptown. The rent was low, too low in hindsight, but not so low that it set off immediate alarms. The photos were blurry but showed a clean place, hardwood floors, lots of light. The ad was written in full sentences with punctuation. The guy renting the room out was named Josh. He was in his early 30s, worked nights as a bartender, and said he kept to himself. That sounded perfect. I work a typical 9 to 5, and if he worked nights, we'd barely see each other. I emailed him. We set up a time for me to see the place that weekend. Josh answered the door with a half smile. He was tall, lean, pale, with short, dark hair. Something about him seemed tired. Not in the "I had a long shift last night" kind of way, but like the wariness ran deeper. Still, he was polite, soft-spoken, and answered my questions without hesitation. The apartment was clean, if a bit bare. His bedroom door was shut. Mine had a window that looked over a small alley and some distant trees. It wasn't perfect, but I had seen worse for much more. I moved in 2 weeks later. At first, everything was fine. Josh kept to himself, like he said. I'd occasionally hear him come home around 3 or 4 a.m., keys jingling, footsteps across the hardwood, and then nothing. I'd see him maybe once a week in the kitchen or passing in the hallway. He was always polite, but there was something strange about his presence. Like he was always tense, like he was listening even when he wasn't looking at you. One night, about a month in, I got up around 2 a.m. to get some water. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed his door was wide open. That was odd. Josh always kept it closed. I didn't want to be nosy, but I glanced in. His room was empty. Not empty as in he's not here, but empty as in there was no bed, no clothes, no furniture, just bare walls and dusty floors. The only thing in the room was a small chair, placed exactly in the center. It faced the wall. No pictures, no posters, just the chair and an overwhelming sense of wrong. I backed away, quietly went back to my room, and closed the door. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I waited until he got home from work and casually asked, "Hey, everything okay with your room? I saw the door open last night, and it looked like you were moving or something." Josh looked at me, deadpan, then smiled. But it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh yeah," he said. "I just like it better that way. Less clutter." He walked past me into the kitchen. No further explanation. I let it drop. A few weeks later, I started noticing small things. A toothbrush I didn't recognize in the bathroom. A woman's scarf on the back of the couch. Once, I came home and swore I heard someone else moving around in the apartment, but when I called out, only Josh responded. I asked him about the scarf and the toothbrush. He just blinked and said, "Must be yours." I don't wear scarves, and I sure as hell didn't buy a second toothbrush. That was when I started locking my door at night. Another night, I woke up to the sound of faint knocking. I thought it was coming from the front door at first, but as I got out of bed and listened closely, I realized it was coming from inside the apartment. From Josh's room. Knock, knock, knock. Perfectly spaced, calm, measured. I checked the time, 3:12 a.m. I crept down the hall, heart pounding. His door was shut, no light from beneath it, but the knocking kept going. I wanted to say something, to call out, but something held me, something primal. I went back to my room and put on headphones, turned on music, and prayed for morning. A week later, I came home, and Josh was sitting on the couch watching static on the TV. Not a movie, not cable, just static. The volume was turned all the way down. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Hey," I said cautiously. He kept staring at the screen. I started toward my room. "They don't like it when you watch them," he said suddenly. I stopped cold. "What?" Josh turned and looked at me. "They see you looking. Then they come closer." I left the apartment that night and stayed at a friend's. The next morning, I came back. The TV was off. Josh's room door was shut. I started packing. I didn't even care if I lost my deposit. I just wanted out. That afternoon, Josh knocked on my door. I opened it cautiously. He looked normal, calm, not like the night before. "Hey," he said, "I think I've been a weird roommate. I'm sorry. I've been going through some stuff." I nodded slowly. "It's okay. I think I need to move out." He didn't say anything for a moment, then gave a tight nod. "I get it. Sorry again." He walked off. I didn't believe his apology. Not really. Something felt performative about it. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the knocking again. But this time it wasn't from Josh's room. It was from my closet. I sat up, heart racing. The knocking was soft, deliberate. 3 slow knocks. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. After a minute, it stopped. I didn't sleep. I stayed up, sitting on my bed with a flashlight, waiting for the sun. The next morning, I opened the closet. Nothing. No sign of anything unusual. I packed the rest of my stuff and left without even telling Josh. I found a sublet with some friends on the north side and crashed there for the next month. I thought that would be the end of it, until I got a call from a block number 2 weeks later. I got to go to voicemail. When I played it back, I heard static. Then, faintly, Josh's voice, "You shouldn't have watched them. They remember you." Then silence. I blocked the number, changed my phone, changed my email. I even contacted the building management to let them know something was wrong with the unit, but they brushed me off. Months passed. I tried to forget. Then, one night in early 2020, just before the pandemic hit, I got a package. No return address. Inside was a single item, the scarf I had seen on the couch that night. Folded neatly, smelling faintly of dust and something sweeter underneath. Lavender, maybe? No note. I moved out of Chicago a month later back to my hometown. I don't use Craigslist anymore. I don't live with roommates. I triple lock my doors at night. And sometimes when the house is quiet and I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear it. Knock, knock, knock from the closet. Story the end.
Story number 5.
When I look back on the year I lived with Jeremy, I find myself questioning how I didn't see it sooner. The signs were there. Small things at first, the kind of things you brush off as quirks. But those quirks evolved, grew teeth. They stopped being weird and became terrifying. I'm not the type to exaggerate. I've always prided myself on being rational, level-headed, a bit skeptical even. But some things, when lived and felt firsthand, change your view of what's rational. In early 2017, I moved to Columbus, Ohio, after landing my first job out of college. It was nothing glamorous, an entry-level position at a logistics company, but it paid decently, and I was excited to start fresh in a new city. I didn't know anyone there, and to save money, I opted to find a roommate instead of living alone. I used a roommate matching site, the kind that verifies identities and matches you based on compatibility. Jeremy popped up about a week into my search. He was 28, a few years older than me, worked in tech, and described himself as quiet, clean, and independent. We had a video chat, and he seemed normal, mild-mannered, maybe a little awkward, but in a way that felt familiar to me. We both liked keeping a tidy apartment, weren't into parties, and just needed someone to share the cost of rent. The apartment was in a quiet area near Clintonville, a 2-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor with a shared kitchen, bathroom, and small living room. I moved in on a cold Saturday in February. Jeremy was already there. He'd been living in the apartment for 2 years and had gone through a couple of roommates. He helped me carry boxes in, offered me tea, and gave me the rundown on the utilities and trash schedule. He even let me take the bigger bedroom, saying it didn't matter to him. The first few weeks were uneventful. Jeremy kept to himself, spent most of his time in his room, and always had headphones on. I rarely heard him even talk on the phone. We'd occasionally cross paths in the kitchen or bathroom, exchange pleasantries, but that was about it. I started to notice little things around the 2nd month. I'd find the bathroom mirror fogged up even when I hadn't showered. I'd be home alone and hear what sounded like faint pacing from Jeremy's room, always in a tight, rhythmic pattern. Sometimes it would go on for hours. I'd ask him about it and he'd just say, "Oh, I pace when I'm thinking." Fair enough. But then there were the nights. It started with the tapping, just a light, intermittent tap against the wall that separated our bedrooms. Always late, between 2 and 4 a.m. At first I thought it was the building settling or maybe the radiator, but it was too deliberate. Tap, 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 pause, then again. I'd knock back sometimes, just once, to let him know I was awake. It would stop for a while, then resume 10 minutes later. When I asked Jeremy about it the next morning, he looked genuinely puzzled. "I don't hear anything. Maybe you're dreaming?" he said. That might have been the end of it, but the noises changed. It went from tapping to murmuring. Faint, unintelligible speech. I'd hear it through the wall. Not loud enough to make out words, but unmistakably human. It sounded like Jeremy was talking to someone in his room, but I never heard another voice respond. I tried to ignore it for a while, chalking it up to weird sleep habits or podcasts played too low. But it kept me up. I started wearing earplugs at night. Then one evening, I came home early from work after feeling sick. The apartment was unusually quiet. I assumed Jeremy was out, but his door was ajar. I don't know why I looked in. Maybe I was just curious. Maybe I was hoping to see something that made all the weirdness make sense. His room was off. There were no decorations, no posters, no photos, just a neatly made bed, a desk with a laptop, and a row of books on the shelf, mostly on cryptography, data science, and a few psychology titles. What caught my eye, though, was the notebook lying open on his bed. It was filled with drawings, intricate repeating patterns, spirals, grids, dots connected by lines like constellations. Some pages had strange symbols next to the drawings, like a language I'd never seen before. It looked obsessive, ritualistic. I backed out, not wanting to get caught snooping. I never told Jeremy I saw it. A few nights later, I woke up gasping. I'd had a nightmare, something about being trapped in a dark room with whispers all around me. When I sat up, I noticed my bedroom door was open. I always closed it. I was sure I had. My hallway light was off, but there was just enough glow from the street light outside to see someone standing at the end of the hall. Jeremy, he was facing my door, not moving, just standing. "Jeremy?" I called out. He didn't respond. I turned on my lamp. By the time I looked back, he was gone. Just not there anymore. The next morning, he acted completely normal. He was eating oatmeal in the kitchen, reading the paper. "Did you need something last night?" I asked. He looked up, eyebrows raised. "What do you mean?" "You were outside my room. I saw you." He blinked, smiled faintly. "I think you were dreaming." I was too shaken to argue. I started locking my door at night. I bought a door jamb and kept a kitchen knife in my drawer just in case. It felt paranoid, but something in me knew I needed it. I started noticing that my things were being moved. Not dramatically, just slightly. My keys would be on the opposite end of the counter from where I left them. My toothbrush was damp before I used it. I installed a cheap camera in my room, one that synced with my phone. Nothing showed up for days. Then, one night in July, I came home from work and found Jeremy in the living room, kneeling on the floor. He had drawn something on the carpet, a massive circular symbol using white chalk. It looked like one of the designs from his notebook, overlapping circles, angles, and runes. He was humming softly, eyes closed. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds before he opened his eyes and looked at me. "I was meditating," he said calmly. "In the middle of the living room? It helped center me," he replied. "You wouldn't understand." I took a photo of the design before he erased it. That night, I emailed it to a friend who studied anthropology. She said it looked like a sigil, maybe adapted from old alchemical or occult traditions, but couldn't place it exactly. Things deteriorated quickly after that. I began hearing things in my room, even with the door locked. Faint breathing, the sound of paper crumpling, soft knocks against the closet. I checked the footage from my camera. One night, it caught him. At 3:14 a.m., my door slowly opened. Jeremy stood there, just stood, barely stepping into the room. He didn't touch anything. He didn't move for nearly 5 full minutes. Then he turned and left. I confronted him that morning, showed him the video. He didn't deny it. "You've been marked," he said. "What the hell does that mean?" I shouted. Jeremy smiled, that calm, faint smile I'd grown to dread. "You wouldn't believe me. But it's already happening. They know your name now." I called the police, told them everything, showed them the video. They took a report but said there wasn't enough to arrest him. He lived there too and hadn't stolen or assaulted me. I called my landlord and begged to break the lease. They wouldn't let me out unless I paid the full remainder of the term. I moved out the next day anyway, left half my stuff behind. For weeks after, I had dreams, vivid, awful dreams. Rooms with no doors, flickering lights, a tall, faceless figure watching me from the foot of the bed. I'd wake up and smell something burning. Once, I found a scrap of paper tucked under my pillow, folded tight, marked with one of Jeremy's symbols. I moved 3 more times that year. Changed jobs, changed cities, but some nights I still hear it. Tap, 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 story the end.
Story number 6.
When I moved to Austin in 2019, I wasn't expecting much more than heat, tacos, and a shot at rebuilding my life after a messy breakup. I'd spent the last 2 years in a tiny town outside San Antonio, recovering from a relationship that had gone toxic fast. So when I got offered a position at a mid-sized publishing house downtown, I took it without hesitation. It didn't pay great, but it was steady, and it gave me the excuse I needed to start fresh. The city's rent prices were no joke, though. I couldn't afford a place on my own, so I did what everyone does. I started browsing roommate ads. Most of them were either sketchy or out of my price range, until I came across one that stood out. A room in a 4-bedroom house in East Austin, just 15 minutes from my office. The rent was almost too good to be true, $500 a month, utilities included. The ad was posted by a guy named Nathan. He described the place as chill, said the house had been in his family for years, and mentioned that he was looking for someone respectful, tidy, and quiet. There were already 2 other roommates living there. Aaron, a bartender who worked nights, and Jen, a PhD student at UT. I met them the following weekend. The house was a little old, but not in a bad way, just lived in. It had a big front porch, creaky wood floors, and a faint smell of incense. Nathan greeted me at the door. He was lanky, soft-spoken, maybe early 30s, with tired eyes and a gentle manner that made me instantly trust him. Aaron was friendly, clearly high when I arrived, but harmless. Jen was polite but distant, the academic type who didn't want to waste time on small talk. I liked the vibe. Quiet, low-key, and cheap. I moved in 2 weeks later. At first, everything was fine. The house was peaceful, and the roommates kept to themselves. Nathan worked from home doing some sort of freelance web design. He rarely left the house, and mostly kept to his room, which was at the end of the hallway, past the laundry area. I only ever saw the door closed. My room was near the front of the house, and Jen's was right next to mine. Aaron's was across the hall. We shared the kitchen and bathroom, and everyone seemed respectful of each other's space. But about a month in, I started to notice things. It began with the sounds. At night, long after everyone should have been asleep, I'd hear movement from Nathan's room. Not unusual at first, he could have just been working late, but it wasn't typing or talking. It sounded like dragging, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. One night, I got up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I passed by Nathan's door, I heard what sounded like whispering. It wasn't like someone on the phone. It was rhythmic, low, like chanting. I paused, listening. The words weren't in English. I wasn't even sure they were words. It gave me the creeps, but I told myself it was probably a podcast or some weird meditation thing. The next morning, Nathan was in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing happened. I asked if he was into any kind of spiritual practice or religion, trying to be subtle. He just laughed. Not really. Why? You were talking last night or chanting? He looked at me for a second too long. Must have been a dream, he said. The way he said it made me feel like I'd done something wrong. That wasn't the only weird thing. Over the next few weeks, I started finding dead things in the backyard. First, it was a bird, then a squirrel, then a cat. Each one looked like it had been laid out carefully in the center of the yard, like it was placed there, not like an animal had dragged it in. I brought it up with Aaron, and he shrugged. This neighborhood's got raccoons and stray dogs. Probably just that, he said. But these weren't mauled. They weren't eaten. They were just dead, like someone had set them down and walked away. The worst part was the smell that started coming from the back hallway near Nathan's room. At first, it was faint, like old meat, then stronger. Jen noticed it too. Do you think something died in the walls? She asked one night as we stood in the hallway, sniffing around. I nodded, but something about the way the smell came and went didn't make sense. Some nights it was overwhelming. Other times it was gone, almost like it was being controlled. One night, about 2 months after I moved in, I was sitting in the living room reading when Nathan walked in. He never really came out to socialize, so it caught me off guard. He asked if I had a moment to talk. I said sure. He sat down across from me, elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor. "Do you believe in energy?" he asked. I hesitated. "I guess so. Like in a general sense?" "There's something in this house," he said quietly. "It was here before any of us. I've just learned to live with it." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He didn't smile. "What do you mean?" Nathan looked at me, his eyes glassy. "I don't think it wants you here." I didn't know what to say. He got up and went back to his room. After that, things got worse. One night, I woke up to a knocking on my door. Not loud, just a steady, deliberate knock. I sat up, heart pounding. "Yeah?" I called out. No response. I got up and opened the door. No one there. I checked Jen's door, closed. Aaron's, closed. I even checked the front door. Locked. I told myself it was a dream. The next morning, I had 3 long scratches on my shoulder. I tried to write it off as my own nails, but the marks were deep, like they'd come from something else. That same week, Jen moved out. No notice. Just gone. Her room was stripped bare one morning, and Nathan casually mentioned that she'd gotten a research grant out of state. I tried to get in touch with her. Texted, called. Nothing. Her social media was gone. Aaron and I were both unsettled. He started sleeping with his door locked. We talked less and less. One night, the power went out. Just in the house. I was in my room, scrolling on my phone, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Deliberate. Then something tapped on my door. Not knocked. Tapped. Fingertip to wood. I froze. "Who's there?" I asked, barely above a whisper. The tapping stopped. Then came the whisper. "I see you." The voice wasn't Nathan's. It was deeper, raspy, wrong. I grabbed the bat I kept by my bed and flung the door open. Empty hallway. But Nathan's door was open for the first time. I approached slowly. The smell hit me like a wall, rot, metal, and something sweet underneath. Inside, the room was dark. No furniture, just black sheets covering the windows and strange symbols painted on the walls. In the center of the room was a shallow hole in the floor. It looked like something had been buried and dug back up. The floorboards were torn away. The hole was maybe 3 feet wide, and something was inside it. I didn't stay long enough to see what. I ran. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and I left. Slept in my car that night and called a friend who lived on the other side of town. I never went back. I called the police, but by the time they got there, the house was empty. Nathan was gone. Aaron, too. No one had a forwarding address. The landlord claimed he didn't even have a lease for Nathan, said the property had been vacant for months. That made no sense. I'd been paying rent into a Venmo account in Nathan's name. I tried reporting it, but nothing stuck. No one was missing. No crime had technically been committed. But I know what I saw. I still dream about that hole in the floor, and sometimes I wake up to that voice in the dark. I see you. Story the end.
Story number 7.
When I was 22, I moved to Pittsburgh for grad school. I'd gotten into a 1-year master's program in public health, intense, fast-paced, and expensive. To keep my loans manageable, I opted for a roommate situation. Living alone in the city just wasn't feasible. I found the listing on a university message board. Room available in 2-bedroom apartment, close to campus, quiet roommate, $475 first month. It was posted by someone named Daniel. The listing said he was a 3rd-year PhD student in epidemiology. I emailed him, we exchanged a few messages, and a week later I went to see the place. It was a small, older apartment in a 3-story brick building just off 5th Avenue. The neighborhood was busy but not noisy, with a gas station on one corner and a pizza place across the street. Daniel met me at the door. He was average height, skinny, pale, with wire-rimmed glasses and unkempt brown hair. He had that socially awkward grad student energy. Polite but distant. He barely made eye contact and spoke softly. Still, he seemed harmless. The apartment was clean but sparse. No decorations, no pictures on the walls. The living room had just a couch and a lamp. His room was closed, and he didn't offer to show it. The room I'd be renting was small, with a single window and an old radiator. But it was clean and functional. I moved in 2 weeks later. At first, things were fine. Daniel kept to himself. He was usually in his room when I got home from class or my part-time job. I rarely saw him eat. Sometimes I'd hear his keyboard clicking late into the night. I assumed he was coding or working on research. About a month in, I started noticing strange things. Nothing big, just small details that didn't add up. The first was the hallway closet. One evening, I was looking for a mop. I opened the hallway closet and it was completely empty. No coats, no cleaning supplies, nothing. Just bare shelves and a single small cardboard box on the floor, taped shut. When I asked Daniel later where we kept cleaning supplies, he said, "I don't really use them. I just spot clean with paper towels." A few days later, the box was gone. I didn't think too much of it at the time. Then there was the matter of the bathroom. We only had one bathroom, and I noticed that Daniel never left anything in there. No toothbrush, no shampoo, not even a towel. Every time I used it, it was as if no one else lived there. I assumed he just kept his stuff in his room, which was a little weird, but not alarming. Until I caught him brushing his teeth in the kitchen sink at 2 a.m. I had come back late from a study group. As I was locking the front door, I heard a noise in the kitchen. I poked my head in and saw Daniel in his pajamas, hunched over the sink with a toothbrush in his mouth. He froze when he saw me. I smiled awkwardly. "Hey." He didn't say anything, just nodded, spat in the sink, and walked back to his room. After that, I started paying more attention. I realized that Daniel never left the apartment. I mean, never. I'd be gone all day at classes or work, and when I came home, I started marking it down in my planner, just out of curiosity. For 3 straight weeks, he never left. Not once. Not even to take out the trash. The only time I saw the front door open was when I was using it. That was when I noticed the food situation. The fridge was mostly empty, except for a few Tupperware containers labeled with masking tape. Monday, Tuesday, etc. They all had rice or pasta, sometimes boiled eggs, no condiments, no drinks, nothing fresh. One weekend, I stayed home to catch up on a paper. Around noon, I heard Daniel's door open. I peered through the crack in my door and saw him emerge with a single plastic grocery bag. He went to the kitchen, opened one of the containers, dumped it into a pot, stirred it for maybe a minute, then put it back in the fridge. The bag, I realized, was empty. He went back to his room and closed the door. Something about the whole routine felt fake, like he was pretending to live a normal life, but missing the details. The turning point came in December. It was a Tuesday night. I had stayed late in the campus library and caught the last bus home. It was snowing hard, and I was soaked by the time I got to the apartment. When I opened the door, it was completely dark. That wasn't unusual. Daniel liked to keep the lights off to save energy. But what was unusual was the cold. It was freezing inside. I checked the thermostat. It had been turned down to 50. I turned it up and went to the kitchen to heat up some soup. As I stood by the stove, I heard a faint sound behind me, a whisper. I turned around, no one there. I shrugged it off as wind through the vents. Then I noticed the fridge was open. Not wide open, just ajar. I closed it and made my food. Then I saw something strange on the floor, a thin trail of water, like something had been dragged across the kitchen. It led to the hallway and stopped near Daniel's door. I bent down to look closer. The water was pink. I touched it with my finger. It was sticky. I stood up quickly, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. I went to my room and locked the door. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard Daniel's door creak open. Soft footsteps down the hall, then nothing. The next morning, I checked the kitchen. Clean. Fridge closed. No trace of the sticky trail. I had to do something. That afternoon, I came home early from class. Daniel's door was closed and I knocked. "Hey," I said, "you got a minute?" No response. I waited, then knocked again. "Daniel?" Still nothing. Something in me snapped. I tried the doorknob, locked. I went to the kitchen and got a butter knife. It took a few tries, but the lock eventually gave. I opened the door slowly. The smell hit me first. It was sharp, like bleach and something else. Metallic, rotten. The room was bare. No bed, no dresser, no clothes. Just a metal folding chair in the middle of the room and a large plastic tarp on the floor. Next to it was a black duffel bag, half unzipped. Inside were knives, surgical knives, dozens of them. There was also a recorder. I picked it up and pressed play. The voice was Daniel's. Day 71. Subject is stable. No visitors, no suspicions. Pause. Appetite has changed. Cravings increasing. Click. End of recording. I stood frozen for what felt like a full minute. Then I heard the front door open. I bolted to my room and locked the door. I heard him walk down the hallway. He paused outside my door. Then a single knock. "Hey," he said calmly, "you home?" I didn't answer. Silence. Then his door opened and closed. I didn't sleep that night. I packed a bag and left at dawn. I stayed with a classmate for the next week while I searched for a new place. I never went back for my stuff. I reported everything to the landlord. He didn't seem surprised, said Daniel's lease had never been official. When I pressed for more, he just said, "You're not the first roommate to leave like that." I contacted campus police. They said Daniel wasn't a student anymore, hadn't been enrolled for 2 years. I checked with the department. Same story. No one named Daniel had been in the program. I tried looking him up online. Nothing. No social media, no directory listing. It was like he didn't exist. A month later, I saw a listing on the same message board where I'd found the apartment. Room available in 2-bedroom, quiet roommate, $475 a month. I clicked it. Same apartment, different name, but the email address was the same. I reported the post. It stayed up for another week before disappearing. That was almost 5 years ago. Sometimes I still wonder what I interrupted, what he was doing in that room, who the subject was. I try not to think about the sticky trail on the floor, but I still keep a butter knife by my door, just in case. Story the end.